I appreciate you guys coming out to listen to the talk. If you haven't gotten one of the forms yet, I'd love to hear some feedback, and particularly if you'd be open to coming out and speaking to Osaka or even speaking at the local college. I'd love to hear about that. So again, as a form up front, please give feedback. So this evening I'm going to be talking about memory analysis, specifically for first responders. I know a lot of, I think if you ever look into the subject, it can look pretty technically intimidating. So I kind of wanted to remove maybe some of that appearance around the difficulty of memory analysis and show how it is useful in first response, and particularly how it can really enable any analyst. Just a little disclaimer, anything I talk about here does not in any way relate to work that I've done for my current employer or past employers. All views expressed are my views alone. Next one. Okay, so a little about me. Been in the industry roughly 15 years. I've managed to collect 65% of the alphabet with certification, so I got to get the rest of the alphabet. I'm currently working as a digital forensic incident response consultant, and these are some of my public works. Go ahead, next slide. With respect to the material tonight, I'm going to try to make the case to everyone why memory analysis matters, particularly if you're in a first response role. I'm also going to address at a very high level how it is you acquire memory. We're also going to dig into some technical things that you probably need to know if you're going to get into memory analysis. We're going to talk about how we can triage badness out there via open source sources. And then, of course, show memory analysis, again, approaching that with a purpose, i.e. as a first responder. Okay, so as far as making the case, really the trend has been for some time now. Many intruders aren't rolling big worms and using that to persist within the enterprise. We've seen the behavior of many intruders that would try to come into an enterprise, attempting to live off the land. That was something tokenized by the counter threat unit over at SecureWorks. And when we say living off the land, that's everything from processes that are only in memory, that never touch disk, non-executable. So a lot of you have seen PowerShell, VB script, things like that. Dual use tools, so a lot of the tools that we use in our day-to-day work in order to administer our environments also double up as being useful for an intruder on our networked environments. Also, fileless persistence. Again, we think back in the 90s, there's some file on the disk, you delete the file, you're good to go. Now there's been a lot of intruders where they'll embed entire scripts within the registry and then have the script executing directly out of the registry, which of course puts, again, their backdoor or whatever it might be into memory. With respect to order volatility, that's really important for first responders. Again, a lot of the things that are very important to a first responder, like network communications, processes in memory, things like registers or caches, all those have milliseconds of lifetime. And the only way you're going to be able to get to that kind of information is to get to the memory analysis space. And the reason why this ends up being important when we think about, again, intruders living off the land using non-traditional means to maintain access and gain additional access within the enterprise, these are really the things you're going to need to be able to spot as a first responder, where is the bad app. Next slide. Oh, back up real quick. This is actually a Perl bot. That seems to be really popular lately in a lot of the honeypots. Anywho, real code. Next slide. And this will be publicly available. So how to get memory. There's lots of reliable ways nowadays. From a tool perspective, in my opinion, that means the skill required has definitely been greatly reduced. Some of the tools we mentioned here from major commercial players, Belksoft, Access Data, Counterattack, Comate, Dump It, you guys have probably heard of that, Magnet Forensic. Again, all these commercial players make freeware available that allow you to get memory. In addition to that, we also have some open source options. Recall, which is a fork of Volatility, is freely available and includes capability to do acquisition. We also have Lime, LKM, and of course device crash as options to acquire raw memory from a physical machine. Some other options, again, the quality of what it is you're able to get kind of starts to go down as I go down the bulleted items. You can configure for your system to actually create a dump on shutdown, or even look at creating a hyper file, which does create some representation of memory. Again, this is better than not getting memory if you're dealing with an endpoint that you suspect has been compromised or is, again, being used in a way that we wouldn't want. With respect to virtualization, there's a ton of features, whether we're snapshotting, suspending, or just grabbing a raw vmem file. When we start thinking about virtualization, the options are pretty wide open, and you actually get a full representation of what was going on the machine without dealing with the risk of time going by while you're trying to make a copy of memory. I'm not going to dig at the details and how to use any of these tools. Again, this will be publicly available, but I do want everyone to recognize that, again, there's great tools out there, great options. It makes this really easy. Definitely take a look. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so again, just on a frame of reference, when we start thinking about order volatility, this was written some time ago by the Internet Engineering Task Force. Things that you want to get, again, registers, cache, routing table, ARP cache. You saw earlier in my reference that these things all have milliseconds of lifetime. Again, if you're able to get that memory capture, even if that data is not in active memory, the interesting thing is because there is so much memory available today to a lot of our endpoints, a lot of this data ends up being in the slack space, if you will, or free mem for you to find later as an analyst. So some technical things to know. You should probably have some familiarity with the operating system that you're going to get memory from. The reason why is, guys, let's just be honest, the low-hanging fruit here is if you're familiar with processes that are going to be in memory based on that operating system, that'll help you quickly spot the differences when you use some of the tool set that I'll show later to interrogate memory to see what's actually there. And so a simple example of that is, if we see a process that normally should be running from, say, System 32 and it's running from a temp folder, hello, we may want to look at that. Some other things to know, CPU architecture. CPU architecture, we get into some other challenges based on CPU architecture because if you're trying to look at code running in, say, a 64-bit machine versus a 32-bit machine, the way that your tools would represent that to you looks grossly different. I will have some cheat sheets, again, that I'll share publicly as an outcome of this presentation. But the short and sweet is recognize what the CPU architecture is. That's going to be key when trying to understand how to use your tools to correctly interpret the memory image that you have. Finally, sockets and connections. You should understand that if a program is going to speak on the network, you should recognize that it has to create a socket if it's going to act as a server service. Again, if it's going to speak over the network, there will be connections, TCP connections, so on and so forth, that will be created. So having a general understanding of TCP/IP is key when we start interrogating memory, asking for those things. From a process perspective, with So there are structures that, say for an example, Windows uses in order to track processes and keep a tally on how the process should be running in memory. And some of the highlights of that data structure, it's called an eProcess data structure. It's one of the executive objects from the Windows operating system, to use some language. And within the eProcess structure, we can find things like what is the command line. Again, when you think earlier when I was talking about living off the land and things being memory resident in non-PE files, for an example, a lot of the times when we see PowerShell being used, or if we store a VB script within the registry and we call it, that full code ends up being a part of the command line. And so Windows, Linux, it doesn't matter, these operating systems doing their basic function, they're going to store what that command line was. And so for you as a first responder, you can come in later, interrogate that, and actually get the full code that your adversary was using on the machine. Security identifiers. Again, sometimes we want to know, well, what level of privilege was this thing running at? That can be really key when we start to think about things like lateral movement, what might it have been doing on the system itself, who was patient 0 as far as the infection is concerned. Again, the security identifiers can really give that away. Environmental variables. A lot of times we'll see the environment that processes and memory are running under be modified in such a way that things like, let's say, the order of how things are executed could be changed. And so what looks like a legitimate process that you've called is really our bad guy executing some code because someone has modified the order of precedence on where things get executed from first. This also applies to, you've probably heard of things like DLL injection. Again, if I modify your order where you check first before calling in a library, then I can introduce my code no matter what's running on the machine. It's just one example. Again, environmental variables. That's stored in memory for anything that runs on the system. Loaded libraries. Again, we think about operating systems and how they do memory management. They've got to keep track of everything, for any program that's running in memory, what it is that program needs in order to function, or else guess what? It's not going to function. And so if we approach memory with, again, a tool set with techniques that don't involve using native tools, you are able to expose these things to help you understand where bad may be occurring. Handles. Handles are really key. Again, handles can be anything from a network connection, a file that was open, a registry we're speaking to. So when we interrogate handles, we can effectively see every resource that is being used by the processes or the modules that are running in memory. Okay, next. So I'm just going to show, can you pause that real quick? Sorry. Oh. Okay, so I gave a presentation, can you make this full screen? I gave a presentation just a couple of weeks ago on reversing malcode, and during that presentation I used a malware called SCAR. It's a Trojan downloader, and I thought for the sake of continuity, so anyone who participated in this could go back and see what happened from a reverse engineering perspective, would also see what it would look like from a first responder perspective dealing with this malcode. Now, what we're going to show here is using open source methods in order to find is what we're dealing with bad. Typically, if you're in a security monitoring function, or if you have folks who are doing security monitoring for you, they're going to get a hash that may have triggered an alarm. They may see a network communication that causes them concern. And so based on that, we can take these little tidbits of information and check them in the public domain and say, are we really dealing with something bad? And so our hypothetical case here is that we've gotten a hash. Go ahead and hit play. Again, virus total, probably all very familiar with it at this point. And here I'm just pasting in the hash, and here's scar, clearly bad. Like, I think you'd be hard-pressed to say, we don't have to worry about this one. And I'm just highlighting that, unfortunately, this projector is not the best, but I'm just highlighting that most of the vendors are identifying this as scar. Here I'm hitting a behavior tab, and what's key here is you can hit pause when it slides back. There we go. Yep. And what's key here is, guys, if you, again, this will be publicly available, the videos are out there already. What we can see is, from a communication perspective, what domains are being spoken to, what the exact resources are that are being requested, what IPs were contacted, what protocols were in use. And the reason why this is important is that not only did we come into this where we had someone who was doing monitoring and said, hey, here's a hash, now they've got the network component of this. And so they may use this network information to trace back and say, oh, it is this computer on the network that allegedly is participating in this communication. Go ahead and play. So and this is just me highlighting the domains that are in use. The other thing I'm doing here is, even though that domain's in use, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. And so I'm checking another resource called ThreatCrowd, again, open source threat intelligence. And what we can see right off the bat as it relates to ThreatCloud, lots of good information here, but these are all the things, the software that have been communicating to that domain. And I got to tell you guys, out of the 5 softwares that were listed up there, and it's okay to let it play through, out of the 5 softwares that were listed up there, 3 of them are bad and were detected as malcode. So more than likely, whatever's behind this domain is bad. So if we see communications going to it from other hosts on our network, because maybe the software was modified and we only caught one variant, hello, it's probably bad. Okay? And here, what's being shown is, again, a little more information about the file itself that's attached to the hash. I'm highlighting, this is actually the symbol file. It's in a directory that has some Chinese characters. And does that mean it's written by maybe a group out of China? I don't know. But that is interesting that the symbols file was in a directory with Chinese characters. There was also some other information there, which I do cover more in my malware presentation. Again, check it out. It's called a malware story. It's out on YouTube. And I kind of dig it if you're doing reverse engineering, how it is you would get further with that kind of information. But let's focus on the first responder, because now we've contacted somebody. Maybe you're getting contacted and you're being asked to check into this. So go ahead and go next. So in our scenario, this is a machine. It was a VDI. We suspended it. We pulled in the memory, and we started to analyze. Okay, there's going to be a lot of pausing here, so ride with me. And if we blow it up full screen.
The side menu grab. Which that?
Push the left arrow. Hold on.
Your left or my left?
Fun. There we go. I think we just left click, it'll pause. And we left click again, it'll play. Okay, so what we see here is me typing incredibly slow, but in short, I'm calling a tool set called Volatility. It's freely available. Anyone can get it in this room. It doesn't cost any money. And what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, look at my vmem file that I grabbed from this virtual machine. And I know that it was from a Windows 7. And so I type in Windows 7 Service Pack 1, because that's when I know it was on the system. And I know it was a 32-bit OS, so I put that in there. The reason why that's key is, go ahead and pause it for just a second. The reason why that's key is that we are telling the tool what fingerprints to use to interrogate this memory file to find the other tidbits of information it needs, so we can start to ask the questions that we really need to answer as a first responder, which is this machine compromised? Again, name the tool vol-f. I'm just pointing to where the file is that represents memory. I'm telling it the profile. Then I'm calling a module called image info. What that's going to do is it's going to look for something called a kernel debug table which is a dependency, one of the many things you can use within this tool to find out where processes are and other structures in memory. So it's doing a scan to see if it can determine it. Go ahead and hit play. Lightning fast. Okay, and we can pause again real quick. Okay. And so what's returned to us now is it says, hey, based on the information you've passed me, this could be one of these two profiles. Again, we already know what operating system it is we're dealing with because we're the ones who took it down. So we're not, some guys in the back-end forensic lab. Again, you're the first responder trying to figure out what's wrong. And so you have firsthand knowledge. The key thing that it identifies for us well, there's several key pieces of information, but the big one is the KDBG. Again, this is the kernel debug table that allows us to fill out the rest of what's in memory the minute we have that information. And so this is the actual address. Again, what's critical here is just knowing that you need the address for the kernel debug table. I can't stress that enough. That is really all we're after. And we're going to validate whether we got the right information. So I'm not a YouTuber, I'm not a public speaker, so you guys bear with me. This is all pretty raw stuff, but certainly give feedback. So I'm executing image info just one more time, make sure I type that in correctly, and really what I'm looking to get back. Part of image info, if you've put in the information correctly, can you pause real quick? If we put in the information correctly, again, we're going to get what the time is on the operating system at the time that the machine was shut down. That's really important because now we can look at our watch and we can say, or we can check our notes and say, well, I know it was shut down at this time. I know the bad activity happened at this time. Time ends up being really important when we do analysis on a memory image. The other things that are coming back, again, we can see things like the KPCR for one of the CPUs. If you're dealing with a machine where there's multiple CPUs, there are other structures of memory that we can reference in order to reconstruct what was happening on the machine. But again, for our purposes, the kernel debug table is sufficient. Okay, you can go ahead and hit play. And so the only thing we've done up to this point, now we're running something called the kernel debug scan. And so using the information that we've gained as far as where the kernel debug table is in memory, the profile which we knew coming into the event, we now scan, pause it real quick. And what we're hoping to achieve now is to make sure that we have correctly identified where that table is and the image we're dealing with. And your validation as an analyst is really presented to you. If you can see the number of processes in memory, the number of modules that are loaded into memory, you have successfully iterated the kernel debug table. So now we can really get to the analytical part now that we've successfully identified what our image is. So here I'm running a module called NetScan, and I'm actually looking at all the network communications that are in memory. And these are all the communications. Well, that's kind of a lot. I don't want to really sift to that list. However, I did get some IPs when we went out to VirusTotal. And so we're going to query against that IP. And when we query against that IP, just using grep, we can see, well, this was closed. And right here, this would be where the process identifier is. And again, a process identifier allows us to tag which process in memory was associated with the network communication. But it's a -1. That's no good. There are no negative process identifiers. That means that this network communication has happened, and the handle, you guys remember we mentioned handles earlier, has already been closed. So we don't know what process it was connected to. But what this does give you is, was this computer speaking to this IP? So as a first responder, you just got that initial level of validation. Yes, it was speaking to one of our known bad IPs. Go ahead. And so the other thing, again, that we know is that there was a specific time when that hash was seen. And whoever's doing the monitoring, they probably told you, hey, it was at 3 p.m., it was at 7 p.m. They're giving you an exact time. So now we're going to interrogate the processes to figure out, let me pause for just a second. The processes to figure out which process it is that might actually be connected to this badness that's going on. What I want to point at is that Windows keeps track of when processes start and when they end. And so in Linux and every other operating system, and so the key thing is, because you have memory, and memory is like a little time machine, we can look and we can say, well, if all of these things, and this says 705, 1905, have all started at 1905, we have all these processes, that's probably when the machine started up. What is outside of that, and is it in scope for our current analysis? Go ahead and play. What we're, yeah, enter. So again, we can see a lot of this all within that time frame. And then when we start to come across this, can we pause? Now, affectionately, I've already named it SCAR for you. Okay, that's probably not going to be the case in practice. You're probably not going to have it line up like that. But the key thing here is that from a time perspective, we can see that this started at a different time other than everything else on the system. As a matter of fact, this system has been up for almost a month, is what this tells me. And we know, because we've spoken to the folks who originally alerted us that, hey, this computer might be compromised, that that time frame when this process started matches the time frame when our alleged badness was going on in the networked environment. So we should interrogate that process further. Go ahead and hit play. Again, sorry about the pixelation. This will be available afterwards if you want to look at this in greater detail. So here I'm just specifically looking at that exact process. Again, it's SCAR. You can see the date timestamp. So now I'm running something called Yara scan. And so Yara is really, really powerful because what we can say is we can say things like this IP, hit pause real quick. We can say this IP and this domain and this, and if 3 of these things are true, I got a positive, okay? Really powerful technology. But as a first responder, we don't even have to get into all that. When I ran Yara scan, the only thing I put in was that World News Byte Host 5, which we saw in the open source intelligent, was known bad. Lots of bad IPs are talking to it. And so we drop it in with our Yara scan module, and we query against this SCAR process, which had the date timestamp that matched when our monitoring guy said, hey, there's something bad going on. And guess what's all in its memory space? References to this bad domain. And so not only do we have, as a first responder, validation that the network communication was there, when we use the domain that it was speaking to, we actually find that within the code that's running in memory. And so at this point, it's kind of a, I don't know, it's kind of like, I don't know, shooting fish in a barrel or something. You know, we're hitting the low-hanging fruit at this point. We're just trying to derive maybe a couple more indicators. So if there is somebody who needs to do further research, you can go ahead and pass them the golden goose egg, which is, hey, look, not only did our monitoring folks, find the hash, find this domain, find this IP, but here are 5 other things that this thing did on the operating system. And so what I'm running now is command line and CMD line. What this is doing, let me just pause. What this is doing, it's actually showing you the command line execution. Now, if we're talking about PowerShell, VB script, a command shell being called, any kind of net shell, any kind of non-PE file, we're going to catch all that code right here. You would have had a big string of characters waiting for you to be decoded. But in our scenario, it just happens to be an executable. But we can see that it executed underneath IE user, and it was run off the desktop. That's pretty useful. You may have somebody to talk to at that point. Okay, let's get here. Right. So now I'm running something called get SIDS. And what this is going to do, it's going to expose the security identifier that's associated with the process. And what's useful about that is now we can quickly spot what identity on our domain might be in use for this bad code that's running that we have successfully identified. And then, so these are the environmental variables. Let me just pause that for just a second. For this particular malware, I did not find anything when I was reversing it or pretending to be a first responder that showed me the environmental variables were modified in a way that it would aid my investigation. I can see the context that this is executing under, but again, that's there wasn't anything really exciting here. But know that you can pull the environmental variables and understand how it is that that bad code got in that process. Again, an example, we could be dealing with something like code injection. That means there is no process, there is no DLL, there's no file anywhere. Rather, what happened was maybe we went to a website we shouldn't have gone to, okay? An exploit was ran against us, there was a heap spray of bad code, and that code started running. Well, you might search for that domain and get a hit on that code that was heap sprayed into memory, okay? And when we look at it from this perspective, we might be able to see if that code made additional modification that you might be able to find in other parts of the machine to see if, if the infection maybe is outside of user space, even affecting things at a kernel level. Okay, let's continue. And here I'm going to pipe it through more, just enter, enter, enter. Yeah, this is me encouraging myself to hurry up. It's not working. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to interrogate for, again, we already know we found the bad process, or we know we found some bad on the computer. We have something to concern ourselves with. Should be looking at handles. Can we pause it? Oh, hit play. Sorry. So here we are executing handles. Again, handles can be a lot of things. Here you can see all the different handle types, semaphores and mutexes, and there's registry keys. That's interesting. But the gem that we're going to end up finding is kind of right at the end. Again, this is every resource this process needed to interact. And this could be really key when we start thinking about cleanup or getting control of our network again. Understanding all this is really important. And at the very end, enter, enter, enter. I'm telling you, my enter key is so wore out. But this is what it would look like if you're doing it in practice. You're not just going to jump right to the result, right? You're going to have to look through some of this stuff and interpret. But the key thing is, guys, if you look at the amount of time I've spent, it's been less than 10 minutes in order to get to this result. So even though I've been speaking for a little bit of time, if you were doing this in practice, can we pause this? You're going to get to this very, very quickly. Okay, I may have missed my cue here. Can I back it up just here? Hey, you know what? Let's let it play through. I think I'll get it with the DLL list as well. So here I'm going to pull, again, this is every file, network connection, all of that exposed to you. I'm now pulling all the libraries that have been loaded in by this process. And a lot of these, again, if you have a little bit of knowledge of the operating system, hey, system 32, that looks right, that looks right. Right here at the end, pause it, please. Again, right here at the end, I was hoping to show you the file handle to this. We can see that there's a folder called config.msi, and it has an sss.wav. Here's the thing, right? If you're a first responder and you've already ID'd that, hey, this is bad, and then you see some, I mean, this is such a unique name. That should immediately jump out at you as, hey, that might be related to the badness. And I don't know who it is that's doing the monitoring. I don't know who it is that may have to dig at this further in the end. You should probably point and say, I know in memory, I saw this unusual folder with sss.wave. And by the way, one of these is a rootkit. Again, this config.msi is yyy.bmp. That's a Trojan downloader. Matter of fact, there's actually 3 files packed into this thing that get dropped on the machine on top of the fact that it tries to download other stuff when it connects to its C2. But my point, though, is you as a first responder, using some very small tidbits of information, hey, my analyst saw a hash they thought was suspicious, did a search. We got some network indicators. Hey, I had a computer speaking to that. Hey, first responder, here we go, first responder. Here's what I have. I think it's this computer. You get on top of that computer with a little bit of foreknowledge. Well, I know it's Windows. Punch that out. Find that kernel debug table. We start checking for the network communication because that's an indicator we have. Okay. We see, oh yeah, there it is. It was speaking to that known bad network. Okay. Well, we don't have a process identifier, so we really can't track it back to an originating process. Well, wait a minute. We have this domain, so we use again a technique called Yara scan. We apply the domain, and had we have done this against all the processes, you only would have gotten one result, and that is our known bad process. And then once we knew our known bad process, we're able to take that just a little bit further and say, what else do we know about that process? Can we jump back to slide 2? Just left arrow. There we are. Slide 4. There we go. Oh, 5. We're going to get there. All right. Again, so when we think about intruders who are trying to live off the land, you know, with memory analysis, a first responder, you can defeat this. You know, if we're thinking about memory-only threats, again, if you give up one inkling, and you got to talk on a network, you are going to talk on a network. You're going to do something that seems out of the way. And that one thing that seems out of the way is now something with, again, Yara scan, we can effectively Google on in memory and say, where is it? Okay. Fileless persistence. Again, if you think you're going to persist out of the registry, so we go look and we say, hey, it's PowerShell. And we go do that command line. We see a whole big dirty string. And we're like, man, that is crazy. And bonus, it has a handle pointing back at the registry. Oh, you just found your persistence, right? I mean, right? Shoot fish in a barrel here. Dual use tools. Again, if we go out there and we find that somebody's using PSEXEC, right? That's a common admin tool so you can remote execute processes. But somebody runs that tool and you see that PSEXEC has handles to 50 different servers executing some weird PowerShell. Hello, we just defeated dual use tools, right? Because now we're able to see with our own eye, are we using this in a way that's suspicious? Non-PE file attacks. I've said it so many times. It's like beating a dead horse here. You can see it. You can see it in memory. It's clearly exposed to you. And you as an analyst can quickly go, you know what? We don't encode our PowerShell when we write it. We push the PowerShell to disk. This has no presence on the disk, right? And those are all things that you as a first responder, in less than 10 minutes, again, that video is 7 minutes long, in less than 10 minutes, you can pull back and inform your monitoring folks. Okay? Go ahead and jump to the end. Okay, and just to advertise, again, I have the GitHub out there. The GitHub does show how to do the reverse engineering piece of this. And there is a video out on YouTube around, it's called a short story on malware analysis. Definitely check it out. It shows the other side of this. So let's say, again, first responders now pass this back off to the security folks. There's probably somebody on the back end who's going to dig at this a little bit further. Well, what might they do? I disclose it all in the malware short story. Okay, and I guess that's it. Does anyone have any questions on what they've seen this evening of either the tools, the techniques, the mal code that was involved? Any questions I can answer? All right, I appreciate you guys hanging in there with me. Thank you.